Hi, gang. Welcome back. Back to the basement classroom here. We got another lesson today on civil rights. I hope you're doing okay and you're finding yourself in a good spot right now. But before we do that, let's talk a little joke of the day here. Um, Another one brought to you by one of your classmates here. Let's take a look. We did the one about going on a diet. I should go on a diet, but I'm not. Um, But did you hear a lot of controversy now? The Secret Service isn't allowed to get down anymore if someone is about to attack the president. Lots of controversy going on with that. They have to yell Donald Duck now. Is that laughter I hear? I hope so. That's a funny one. If you don't like it, too bad. I think it's kind of funny. So let's talk a little civil rights here. This would be chapter 5 in your book. Hopefully, you're going along with the guided readings, and you're doing okay with those. But let's talk a little bit today about civil rights here. Um, so when you're talking about civil rights, your civil rights in theory come out of the 14th Amendment here. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you again here, but just know that in the 14th Amendment, the yellow part here. Are your civil rights, right? Any part nor deny any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the law, right? That's an equal protection clause that we talk about. Um, Remember, all states are supposed to honor this, that everyone is protected under the law. However, you know from your studies of American history that that's not always the case. We have seen different groups be discriminated against in our nation's history, be it African Americans, be it women, people with exceptionalities, and even in today's world, the LGBTQ community. And we're going to talk a little bit about all them. Remember here the difference between civil rights and civil liberties. Civil rights are policies that are designed to protect people against discrimination by either the government officials or individuals. Discrimination can come in lots of different ways. It can be based on race, gender, age, disability, sexual orientation. There's two different types of discrimination, and these are both vocab words. Hopefully, even though we're not doing a vocab quiz, you're taking a look at the vocab list there. De facto discrimination is societal based, and de jure discrimination are laws that are actually discriminatory. We see both of these in our country, a lot of societal based discrimination as well as discrimination that is based off of laws. And the law ones are the ones that we see oftentimes overturned by the Supreme Court. So, equality, guys, when we're talking about equality in America, we're talking about equal opportunity to achieve equal results, right? Everyone should have the same opportunity in America. That's what we mean, equal protection, right? But over time, right, equality has changed, right? In America, the 14th Amendment, we want equal protection of the laws. Okay, that's that equal protection clause. That's what we're talking about there. So, like I mentioned before, 4 groups that have been kind of historically discriminated against in America. And you might say that there's more than 4, but for our purposes at AP Government and in our book, what it talks about are kind of 4 different groups that have been historically discriminated against. The first group is African Americans and discrimination based upon race. If you remember when our country was first formed, we had slavery in America. It was legal; you were allowed to do it. There are some Supreme Court cases that upheld this that you may have heard of. And again, a lot of the cases that we talk about today aren't your required cases, but you might see them pop up in a Supreme Court FRQ, or you might see them referenced in part of an argumentative essay. So I just give them to you here. So Dred Scott versus Sandford, if you remember this one, this is the one where the Supreme Court said that slaves were indeed property. Then we have the Civil War and the 13th Amendment that freed the slaves. Then we have the 14th Amendment, which gives them protection under the law, and then the 15th Amendment, which grants the newly freed slaves suffrage, which remember is the right to vote. But unfortunately, even though we have the Civil War, even though we freed slaves, during the Reconstruction time period, there is a lot of segregation, right? We have the Jim Crow laws. That would be that de jure segregation where there are laws that are discriminatory. Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court case that said Separate but equal is okay. So we see these things, unfortunately, a lot in American history. But then as we get into the 1900s and the mid 1900s, we have the civil rights movements that tries to fix things. If you remember, one of our required cases, Brown versus the Board of Education, said separate but equal is not cool. Then 10 years later, we passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which makes racial discrimination illegal in most public places. Created this Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that's supposed to monitor job discrimination. The Civil Rights Act also strengthened voting rights legislation. Then we have the 24th Amendment to the Constitution, which eliminates poll taxes. And those are small taxes that are levied on people that you had to pay in order to vote. And then the next thing we have as far as the civil rights movement goes, in 1965, we passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that helped end formal and informal barriers to voting, like trying to make it easier for especially the African American community to vote again. Another thing that we see, like we do have other races and ethnic groups that are discriminated against in America. Native Americans have historically been discriminated against. And there is a Supreme Court case that you might see, but you don't have to have memorized the Santa Clara Pueblo versus Martinez of 78. This basically just says the Supreme Court affirmed that the tribes have sovereignty to do their own things, even if it's a discriminatory practice. Asian Americans, right, have been discriminated against in America. Korematsu versus the United States basically allowed the internment camps to happen during World War II. You have Hispanic Americans and illegal immigration, and while there's not a specific Supreme Court case that kind of goes along with that, there you do see Hispanic Americans we see these discriminated against in America. Another group that we kind of see when we talk about civil rights and are always in America trying to get rights are women, right? Gender and women issues. And women have been trying to get rights in America, especially since the 1900s, the early 1900s, and the first wave of feminism, where you see women trying to get basic rights. Right, we extend civil rights for women. In the early 1900s and 1920, we have the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, extending them suffrage. A lot of laws were designed to protect women. At least that's what the theory was, to protect women and then protect men from competition with women. And that's where your discrimination comes into place, right? Where women can only work certain hours, women can't hold certain jobs. And that's where you see the discrimination come in. We see second wave of feminism come later in the 1900s, especially during the 1960s and 70s. We have Roe versus Wade, one of our Supreme Court cases, which made abortion legal. And then again, looking for personal equality, right? Where women have freedom to do what they want, especially in this case with their bodies. In today's world, right? Women have issues today. Women in the workplace, they're moving obviously out of traditional roles of things that are like lower level positions and into like higher level positions. But there's still things that exist like wage discrimination. Currently, men or women in many like corporate positions are at 84 cents on the dollar to a man. So they don't make as much money as men do. There has been improvement, but we still see that there is a lot of wage discrimination. Women in the military, right? Women currently aren't drafted, but for a long time, women were not able to serve in forward positions. They're allowed to do those things now. There's equal opportunity for women that exists in the military now in today's world as well. So we're working on it, but it's still not the best. People with exceptionalities. What we're talking about here with this is anyone with a disability. If you've heard me talk about my brother, he fits into that. Anyone with special needs is kind of where we fit into that. There has been some legislation, and I say recent in the terms of world history. 1990 is recent, but the Americans with Disability Act, especially, that's where, and we've talked about this a lot this year. This law in particular that allows that allows that stops discrimination against people with exceptionalities or disabilities, especially in public places and schools. Is where we talked about the doorways and the bathrooms and having wheelchair desks, things like that, elevators in buildings. And then kind of the final group, which is really new in today's world, we see the LGBTQ community is one that is constantly fighting for civil rights. There are a couple of cases that you might hear about. In 2003, Lawrence versus Texas, basically being a homosexual was illegal in many places. In this case, kind of struck down many of these laws that discriminated or made it illegal to be homosexual. So you see laws like this being struck down. This case here, this Obergefell v. Hodges, is a case. Again, these aren't required cases, but you might see them mentioned in reference to this civil rights. This is the case from 2015 that allowed gay marriage to be legal essentially across all 50 states. So we are expanding civil rights and trying to create protections for people in these communities here. And again, like still working on it. Still a long way to go with lots of these things. But when you think about civil rights in America, these are a lot of the groups that have been discriminated against, and these are things that we're trying to do to try to stop these discriminations. And then this is one that we've done before, where we've talked about affirmative action. We did this when we talked about public policy. This is a policy designed to give attention to special attention or basically compensatory treatment to members of some disadvantaged group. We see this a lot with college. That's where we did our case study, and we talked about this case here. Again, not a required case, but you might see it referenced. All these cases, Title IX programs, increase women activities. But all of these things are groups where we see civil rights, trying to expand civil rights and try to increase protections for people that have historically been discriminated against in America. Remember, as you take a look at this, if you have questions, make sure you shoot me an email or stop into one of our virtual meetings that we have on Tuesdays and Fridays. As we get into next week, we'll be talking a little bit more about getting you ready for the AP test. Have a great day.